Tuesday, everybody. Happy Tuesday. If you're on here, y'all, please get those likes up. Get those likes up. Tag anybody. Share this discussion with anybody who you think may find it interesting. I'm pretty excited about today's topic. I haven't heard a lot about this particular subject in general, but I think it is something that needs to be addressed, something that needs to be talked about more, and that is misandry in the media. Many of you guys are very familiar with misogyny and the different misogynist ways in programs and movements and things that have been done to fight against misogyny, but we don't like to talk about misandry as if that doesn't exist. And so I'm excited about today's special guest, Torraine Walker, who has a lot to say about this subject and has dedicated much of his work to addressing some of the issues associated with misandry. So I'm going to bring him on and we're going to get into it. Again, guys, if you're on here, get those likes up. Also, feel free to show support to the show. You can find me on CASHAPP, VENMO, Chardé, and also feel free to send your super chats. I will do my best to acknowledge all super chats. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on the special guest and we will get started. Hey.
Hey, Chez, how are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you. Thank you for bringing me on.
Yeah, my pleasure. As I mentioned before, this is not necessarily something that I hear addressed a lot, but I think it's very important. Oops, sorry, looks like my audio was there.
It's all good.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear,
okay,
yeah.
Sorry. My audio was cutting out. But anyways, yeah, so it's a pretty important subject, but I don't really hear it, addressed a lot. And so, like I said, when I ran across your profile, I thought what you did sounded really interesting to me. So I'm really excited to have you come on and share your perspective. So if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and letting the guests who are in know about what you do and some of your different work.
Cool. Well, my name is Torraine Walker. I'm the founder and editor of Context Media Group. And Context Media Group is pretty much an outlet that I created because there were a lot of people I felt in the Black community and in lower income communities that weren't getting heard. And I started that through working in activism and just talking to people. So I figured, you know what, if I have the tools and I have the skills, why not just talk to people and get their stories for themselves? That's my background. But my background is in journalism, in investigative journalism, and also in covering activism over the past 7 years.
Okay, awesome. So your background in journalism, really emphasis on just getting the stories of untold people, the stories of people in general. Absolutely.
Yes.
Now, when was the first time that you noticed misandry in the media?
I noticed this starting to happen around the time of the protest movements in America, starting with Mike Brown. When Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson, that was the beginning, I think, of a nationwide awareness, for lack of a better term, of like some of the things that Black men deal with, just in institutionalized racism, especially when dealing with law enforcement. And there was a huge media presence that came into Ferguson. I was actually in Ferguson when things were happening, and I was talking to people. Yeah, not at the very beginning, but a little bit later. And if you look at the tone of coverage, the tone of coverage around Mike Brown at the beginning was about the horror of police brutality and about institutionalized racism in America. And there was a lot of conversation in mainstream media about that, and that's where things were going. I noticed as the couple of years went on, because unfortunately we had an incident, seemed like every week somebody was getting gunned down by police in every city. And that became an ongoing story. And I noticed that the tenor of some of the conversation began to change. It began to be a lot of the conversation in media spaces and activist space began to move away from white supremacy and police brutality. And it started moving into these conversations about gender, which is an important conversation, but that wasn't why people were out in the streets and why all this information was starting to get disseminated. It was because the people were getting tired of being brutalized by white supremacy. And I noticed that the conversation shifted away from that into these things about, well, who's getting more oppressed? Is it Black men? Is it Black women? Is it gender nonconforming people? And again, while those conversations are important, that's not why people were out in the streets. People were getting tired of being abused and beaten in the head. And to move things fast forward into 2020, George Floyd was murdered.
Yeah.
That's when that conversation moved from a national conversation into a global conversation. And what happened was, it was again the same patterns that were happening. People were horrified at the murder of this Black man, and the world pretty much united around that. That was the first time you saw like global sympathy on that scale for individual Black men since the 60s. And not too long after that began to happen, I started to see the movement begin to shift again. It moved back into gender. It moved back into, just say gender nonconforming politics and that sort of thing. And again, while that's important, that's not why people were outraged. They were outraged because this man died in the street and he was murdered because a policeman kneeled on his neck for almost 9 minutes. So that's when I saw things happening, starting to move to the point now where what you see around that conversation is people who are African-American men barely have a voice in these conversations that were started by the deaths of African-American men. And that's when I started seeing the misandry begin to flow into these conversations, into the mainstream through academia. I hope that wasn't too much.
No. I think, what you're saying sounds very similar to a conversation that I had with Dr. Tiazon Johnson, and just some of the different things that I've heard him talk about, where for whatever reason, anytime whether it's the violence, the harm, the pain, whatever, there happens to be a higher number that affects Black men in particular. So for some reason, it's like the focus has to be taken away from that. And it has to be on, well, no, it's not men, it's really women, or to your point, you mentioned it's gender. And I can't say I really necessarily noticed that at all until I started really getting into the space and really having some of these conversations and seeing how things to me that seem like they were maybe a problem of the community or things that were negatively impacting Black men, it ended up having to become a competition on who's getting harmed more, who's getting hurt more. And I'm like, why is this something to boast about? This is not a competition. It's like if Black men are being hurt disproportionately, that's affecting the Black community, or vice versa. Why does it have to be, oh, well, how about women? And I started to see that more recently, found it odd. So yeah, it's like making total sense to me.
Yeah, and again, a lot of these conversations are not coming from people who are working in working class and everyday, Black neighborhoods. A lot of this conversation is coming from academia, and it's coming from people with feminist agendas. And again, there's nothing wrong with feminism. It's just that people who have co-opted feminism to try to push over their agendas that have nothing to do with really feminism, nothing really to do with Black women either. It's a lot of opportunism. And if you can separate Black people as a mass into different parts of gender and different sort of like these silos and sections, they're much more easier to control. And I think that's what happened, unfortunately.
Interesting. So you're saying the people who are really driving this divide, that you would say, are people who have bad intentions, coming from maybe academia, or coming from places where it's more about maybe trying to get control, you think, or maybe get access to money if they're able to champion the charge.
That's exactly what I think it is. I think it's a combination of getting access to funds and also getting access to power. And it's also getting access to academic power as well. Because if you look at the history, and if you go back and do some research on some of the people who've been pushing some of these narratives, a lot of them come directly out of like academia, or they come through activism, but not grassroots activism. It's activism that's been siloed into nonprofits that are tied to academia as well. So what they do is, unfortunately, they come into a lot of these things that happen in poor and working class neighborhoods. These people do not have access to a lot of the media attention that these people have, but the people who come in do. So they have the power to shift the conversation away from the people who are talking on the street and move it into these academic exercises that have absolutely nothing to why people are on the ground.
Very, very, very interesting. Very interesting. And it also makes sense. Also makes sense to some of the stuff that I started to see online that to me that seemed a little off. Shout out to, is that Daper Guest with a 5 on the super chat. Also, guys, if you're here, get those likes up. So this actually kind of brings me into another question that I've heard this talked about a lot, and actually plan on addressing this in a upcoming video. But it's this idea of Black femicide that I've seen right now just really taken off a life of its own. In your opinion, do you think Black Androcide isn't getting as much attention as Black femicide, just based upon the things that you mentioned earlier?
Well, I want to preface that by saying that, I think the health and well-being and the safety of Black women is a very important thing, and that does need to be highlighted.
Yes.
And it also needs to be addressed because it is a very serious issue, not just in America, but globally. But again, what happens is that conversation could be a very helpful and a very fruitful conversation, a very productive conversation. But what happens is the people who have control of that conversation are working through their own bitterness and their own personal trauma.
Yeah.
And instead of being honest about that, they're taking that individual trauma and they're projecting it onto Black men. And that's not necessarily the case. There are a very small number of Black men who are toxic in the community, and they do need to be dealt with. And they also need to be, if they can be treated, fine. If they need to be dealt with by the system, then that needs to happen too. But that's a very small number of Black men. What they do is they take the small number of Black men who are toxic and can be harmful and use that to paint a broad brush around all of us. And that's what I think is dangerous. Now to answer your other question, I think the idea of Black Androcide, I think it does overpower the conversation about Black femicide, but it's only because it happens so much more often than what happens to Black women. That's just the truth. If you look at the numbers, I don't have them in front of me, but I'll pull them in a minute. When you look at quality of life rates, when you look at life expectancy, when you look at life outcomes when it comes to Black men and Black women are at the bottom of every socioeconomic metric, but Black men are at the bottom of that metric. And that doesn't get talked about because this country has never really cared about the well-being of Black men outside of what we can do with our physical labor. That's just the truth. And unfortunately, that translates over into our personal relationships with some of our Black women. It definitely translates into how we are looked at in the academy and even in the social programs that we are supposed to benefit Black people, but they really don't. So it's just a cycle that happens that we've bought into, and that's why you see that happening.
Interesting. So I think I went over this a few weeks ago. If I'm not mistaken, if you just look at the CDC, they show like the top, they kind of break down by group, by gender, the top killers, and top 10 Black women. Homicide didn't rank anywhere in the top 10. For Black men, I think number 4, if I'm not mistaken, was homicide, according to the CDC. I covered this off on a live a few weeks ago. And again, because I was really interested in this topic and I'm still doing my research, but when I started to hear the talk of Black femicide and the reason behind it or the story behind it, that's when I started to get concerned. Again, to your point, the untimely death of anybody, I think, should be taken seriously. And we really need to be honest about what's causing those different things. But, blanketly blaming an entire group of men for something that majority of them don't do, I think it just downright gets into propaganda, and that's incredibly dangerous. And so that's one of the reasons I started to take interest in that, because I've seen it be a popular talking point to push misandrist messages, and I just don't think that's helpful, or even that's dishonest. If you really do want to get to the root problem, that's not the way to do it. So
yeah. You're absolutely right. And again, I want to say that these issues are serious issues that need to be dealt with, but it's the absolute worst people who are leading this conversation, I'm not going to say any names, at least not right now. I might later, but I don't know. But there's people, depends on how I feel. There's people, the people who have control of this conversation, like I said, are people who are already connected to media spaces and they're connected to academia. So they already have a built-in soapbox when they say these things that will automatically push this stuff out and promote these things for them. And there's also the fact that, Black women overwhelmingly outnumber Black men in academia and in, places like, mainstream media spaces like CNN and like MSNBC and a lot of places that get a lot of funding. So those are the narratives that you get, and those are the narratives that go out into the wider world. And because people who don't know Black culture are afraid to push back against some of these narratives because they don't want to get either canceled or they don't want to get pushed back because they feel like they're attacking a Black woman or a Black man who goes along with that, nobody says anything. And that's what makes it dangerous. There's room for these conversations, but they just need to be opened up.
So you're saying people will get into positions of power, presumably Black people will get in positions of power and push these misandrist messages. And because maybe other cultures, they're not as familiar with Black culture, or they don't want to be ratioed or blacklisted, they just won't say anything. They'll just kind of let those people do their thing because they're like, this is out of my wheelhouse. I'm just going to let you kind of run and handle it.
Exactly.
Now that brings me to my next question, because I think this is interesting. I see a few people who are like, no, please name drop. We got to know. We got to know who they are. Shout out to Philip J with the 10 on the super sticker. I really appreciate it. Also, shout out again to Daper Gents with the 5 on the super sticker. Very, very much appreciated, guys. Over here, get those likes up. We are talking about misandry in the media, and I'm very excited to have my special guest today, Torraine Walker, who has a lot to say about this subject and has spent a lot of different years, dedicated a lot of his work to addressing this. So back to your earlier point about people being in positions of power and really, I guess, having the resources to push this. Let me see. So why do you think Why do you think misandric Black women in particular are hired by major media companies? I know we kind of started this conversation on Twitter based upon a woman, a Black woman who had had a very, very, very misandrist, troubling, racist, however you want to put it, comment on her social media, and then she had gotten hired by a major media company, even with that on her record, on her social media profile. So I'm just curious as to why you think some of these women who have openly expressed misandrist messages are getting hired by major media companies today.
Well, I think there's two reasons for that. Number one is because, like I said earlier, Black women overwhelmingly outnumber Black men in the academy, especially in higher education. Mm-hmm. And when you go into those spaces, I've been fortunate to be inside of those spaces, but what happens is the group of the cohort of Black people who move into those spaces is very small. And the overwhelming majority of those people are going to be either people of color who are not Black or white, and whites make up the majority of that. So what happens, I think, is that a lot of times it becomes a situation where they want to get in where they fit in, and they kind of pick up the general tenor of the conversation around their cohort and the people they want to have access to, and they go along with that. That's one part of it. The other part of it is, if you take a look at a lot of the rhetoric that's coming out of the academy, a lot of it is feminist rhetoric. It's not even Black feminist rhetoric, it's white feminist rhetoric. Mm-hmm. I would tell everybody who's listening to this, a lot of what we're dealing with right now comes directly from a source, a woman called Shimla Firestone. She wrote a book called The Dialectic of Sex in 1972, if I'm not mistaken. And what she did was she basically gave a breakdown that said, but the basic premise of the book is all men are patriarchs and all men want to be oppressors. She was not really talking about Black men, but because a lot of women in the academy were moving into feminist theory at that time, and she was very influential along with Gloria Steinem, that became sort of like received wisdom in the academy, and a lot of women picked up on that, and a lot of people like Michelle Williams and people like Bell Hooks took that and ran with it. And I just want to say that the reason she said that about Black men is because she never really interviewed any Black men. This came from in the early 1970s when she was watching the Black Panthers, and she was observing the Black Panthers. And the Black Panthers at that time were very hyper masculine because, just because of the imagery, the black leather jackets, the black berets, the shotguns, that was a very hyper masculine image because it was pushing back against images of white supremacy that saw Black men as cowards and weak and scared. And because she saw that, she assumed that Black men wanted to be patriarchs as well. That's where that came from, the dialectic of sex. So that's the first part of it. The other part of it is because it ties into the way this country sees Black men. I call it the myth of the Black boogeyman, where, look, ever since Black men have been on these shores, we've been brutalized, we've been demonized. But I think the demonization has been done more damage than the actual physical abuse that we've suffered, because that allows everyone in this country to see Black men as a gigantic boogeyman. It doesn't care if you're built like Elijah McCain, who was killed by the police, and you're autistic. It doesn't matter if you're as big as George Floyd. It doesn't matter if you're Tamir Rice playing with a toy gun in the park. You're all considered a boogeyman. And anything that feeds into that, people are going to accept, even subconsciously. And I think that's how a lot of these people get hired. And if you come into the academy, or if you come into the media with these preconceived notions, and you're already working in a system in a country that already believes that Black men are the devil anyway, of course you're going to find success.
Very interesting. So you're saying, the fact that academy has really started to embrace some of these feminist ideologies, right? That paints just a broad stroke over men in general as being patriarchs, and then Black men in particular being boogeyman patriarchs. So that's already a pervading idea. And then I imagine there's a link between, some of these different schools and these major media companies, like through internships, things like that. So I imagine they're getting some of these people straight out of college. And then again, because that stream of thought has come from the academy, from the education, which is overwhelmingly female, it's now seeping over into the media. And then this is why you start to see, it's kind of like they're feeding off of each other, because they're in both places really controlling the conversation. And it sounds like they're not necessarily giving room for other points of view or other vantage points to be expressed.
Exactly. Like I say, if you're already connected to a system, it's really easy to move in that system. Unfortunately, a lot of Black men have been pushed out of the system. They've been pushed out of the academy. They've even been pushed out of a lot of media spaces as well. And that's how come what's happening now, you're starting to see a lot of backlash against that. Love him or hate him, people like Kevin Samuels and people like Kwame Brown, have shown that there is a market out there and there is a room for people, for Black men with voices who don't necessarily come through the academy, but they have something they have to say that people want to hear. I think that's sort of threatening to a lot of people because a lot of these people didn't matriculate through that academy where it feels like everything you say has to be peer reviewed and everything you say has to go through a committee before it's getting heard. And that's also something that's happening in the media as well. To go back to the idea of about activist journalism, if you go back and look at what happened, there was an incident that happened during the Freddie Gray protest in Baltimore. There was this, I think it was Geraldo Rivera, came into the hood and he was trying to create this narrative about what was happening in Baltimore. Mm-hmm. And this young brother came in and basically confronted Geraldo and said, "What you're saying is not truth. You're here for the riots. You're not here to figure out who we are and you need to get out." And they basically forced him out off the block. That sort of thing was sort of like a watershed moment in journalism because it showed people that you don't have to go through these gatekeepers and doors to get your message across. And I think that's what's happening now. So I think all that stuff tied together is kind of scaring these people and they're doubling down on their rhetoric, but it doesn't have some of the same bite like it used to, because you see a lot more pushback from people than you saw maybe like 2 to 3 years ago when people were afraid to speak. And it's coming from people on the grassroots, a few people in academia, but not a lot, but people on social media. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation, but it's starting to happen.
Yeah, and I hope so, because we need balance. We really do need balance. So I think the way that this thing has taken on a life of its own, I think just to promote really extreme, hateful, and dangerous ideology, it's just not good. I don't know how else to put it. It's not good. Shout out to Deanie for the 10 on the super chat. I do appreciate you. Also, guys, if you're on here, get those likes up, y'all. Likes are free. We're having a conversation about misandry in the media. I've been having a great discussion with Torraine Walker, who has a lot to say about this topic and has dedicated quite a bit of his work. So also, guys, be sure to check him out on social media. I've linked information to his website, his Twitter, his YouTube, all of that. So definitely be sure to check him out. You can also show support to him on his CASHAPP when we're done, guys. So feel free to do so. So moving on to the next question, because I think you brought up so many different things. What do you think of, or what's your take on Tommy Curry's work, Man Not? I think he's one of the very few Black male studies professors. I'm sure you're familiar with his book. So what are your takes on just that literature and what he has to say?
Well, I want to say right first and foremost, I am a huge booster and I'm a huge fan of Dr. Tommy Curry. I've actually interviewed him and he is a brilliant scholar, first of all. And I think the Man Not is a seminal work in the field of Black male studies. And a lot of this conversation that we're having, a lot of the conversation now is due to him. There's other scholars as well who are starting to come into this work, but he is a genius. And I've actually, I think his work is important because, like I said, a lot of these people come through the academy and they don't listen to anybody outside of the academy. So I think the fact that he is in the academy and he's done very well in the academy, and he was able to write this book, even with what he dealt with in the academy, is a work of genius. And it's created a work that they can't ignore. And it's created a work that's moved into other spaces that is going out of the academy into the book is going into the hands of the rank and file, Black men and Black women. So I give him much respect and I give him all his props.
Awesome. I'll have to check that out. You said he interviewed him. Looks like also Omawali on here interviewed him too. I see Omawali in the chat. Shout out to Omawali.
I interviewed Dr. Curry on my spaces on Twitter about a month ago, and I got like 15,000 people that turned in to listen to it.
Oh, awesome. That's awesome. All right. So let me see. On to the next question. So, okay, in your opinion, is institutional racism, is it inherently misandric?
I think it's, I don't really think it's inherently misandric any more than America is inherently misandric when it comes to Black men. It's not misandric when it comes to white men, definitely, because white men built these institutions, whether we're talking about, the court system or academia and these sort of things. When it comes to Black men, I think so. But I also think it's also misogynistic when it comes to Black women, because I think it does Black women a disservice when it feeds a lot of Black women into this rhetoric that has absolutely nothing to do with their lives, and it feeds them into these agendas that, again, have absolutely nothing to do with Black men, Black women, or Black men. So it does the whole Black community a disservice. So yeah, when we talk about Black men, I don't think it's so much misandric as it is that Black men are if it's misandric, it's misandric by omission, because we don't even factor into a lot of academic studies unless we're dead or unless we're being pathologized. You know what I mean? I'm not talking, of course, you get one or two people like a Cornel West or a Michael Eric Dyson or I'm blanking on his name right now, Skip Gates, people like that. You know, you're going to have one or two Black male academics who are going to be prominent. But on the whole, those are the exceptions, not the rules. And a lot of them, there's no feeder programs to feed intelligent Black men who might want to go into the academy, into higher education like that. So that's what I think it is. I think it's the misandry of lower expectations and not being seen.
Okay, interesting. So you would say, yeah, it's so. And then I guess because you mentioned it's misandric, but also there's misogyny as a result. So you think it's more. Institutional racism is more an attack of just the Black community specifically versus it being Black men who are more targeted. I just want to make sure I kind of understand.
Yeah, I'm saying that I think Black men are targeted by Black men being completely shut out of the academy in the first place. But once you get away from that, what you have to deal with is the Black women who are in the academy. And I think there's a lot of miseducation going on in those fields. And I'm not talking about the sciences, because science is science, even though you can still have race science. But a lot of Black women who go into the academy are going into the humanities and going into liberal arts. And those things are very subjective, and they can be whatever you want them to, depending on what a professor wants them to be. And if a professor comes from a white feminist perspective in the Susan B. Anthony's, Shumla Firestein, Gloria Steinem tradition, you're going to impart that knowledge and that theory into your Black students. Yeah. And when you do that, you're also miseducating the women who are in those classrooms. And not even so much that they're and you do have Black women who go into these places who have dealt with trauma from Black men. That has to be said. But instead of dealing with that trauma on a holistic level or getting some sort of help or some sort of therapy, a lot of them weaponize that trauma into a blanket attack for all Black men in general. Men in particular, but Black men in general. So when they go out into the world, even sometimes if they come out of the academy or come out of the humanities and they work in fields like psychology or mental health, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, or if they work in the legal field and places like that, that mentality goes out into the world. And then what kind of damage does that do to the Black men who come into their hands and the Black women?
Yeah, I haven't done the exact numbers on this, but it's interesting you mentioned obviously media, the humanities, law enforcement. I mean, I've kind of heard, unfortunately, that you have, Black judges and Black female judges now that are having higher records of putting, Black men behind bars between white men and other nationalities and just things like that where, where originally you would think, oh, if you're going to see a certain kind of oppression, it's going to come in this form. And now we're starting to literally see it in women who share a complexion. Like, to me, this was mind-boggling, and I never really thought about it so much until I started getting on this space and I started to see things to me that were just blatantly wild coming from women who we have the same hair texture and skin. And I'm like, I'm very confused as to what's going on. So interesting stuff. Shout out to Renzo Jones with the 5 on the super chat. Much appreciated. I see. Our people need to give back to Caucasians every bit of their flawed version of psychology in this entire system for our problems to stop. Thanks for the support. I always appreciate you stopping by. So what is your opinion? Because you mentioned how this ideology, it's interesting how you're showing that under the education system, because these women, they may go into a feminist academy and they'll get this certain knowledge and they can go into different fields. And so this is one of the ways we can see these streams of thought starting to infiltrate different fields, in different industries. In your opinion, what do you think of just the divestor movement, right? Divestor accounts out there today. Do you believe that they are real Black women? Do you believe that they're trolls? Do you think that they are an offspring of what's seen in the academy, abuse women? I mean, just what are your thoughts on that whole movement and how it's become, in my opinion, an aggressive attack against Black men?
You know what? I've avoided talking about divestors for a long time just because I didn't want to give them more shine than they got. But
fair point.
I think it does need to be addressed. Honestly, I think I really don't think the majority of divestors are really Black women. I think a lot of them are bots and trolls. And a lot of them are probably like white supremacist groups that probably came over from Reddit or places like that. They try to like, or from higher up, and I'll leave that alone. I think the alphabet agencies might be a part of that as well. I can't prove it, but I'm just saying. So I think the vast majority of them are trolls and white supremacists hiding, masquerading as black men. Having said that, if you go on social media, you can find evidence of real black women who use their actual names and their actual government names and who work in media and work in academia, who say things just as bad as divestors have said. I mean, there's actual black women who've said that black men aren't dying fast enough, like the police aren't killing us. And a lot of that comes from, I think, either miseducation or some of this rhetoric that I've been talking about. And I think a lot of it also comes from the fact that a lot of these people, a lot of the women who are genuinely like that have this idea in their head that if they get away from black people in general, especially black men, that that the white Prince Charming is going to come pick them up and save them from their blackness and save them from being around these horrible black boogeymen. And I can say this here, if I said it anywhere else, they'd probably get mad. If you take a look at some of the real pictures of some of these people that are hiding behind their images, no man is choosing them for anything, period, black, white, or otherwise. I'm just keeping it 100. So I'm saying, I mean, I'll say it. It's the truth. I mean, look, anytime you see somebody on social media, especially Twitter or TikTok, saying hateful things about black men, if they're hiding behind an image of a celebrity or if they're hiding behind some fake cartoon picture, do a little digging and find their real pictures, and that'll tell you everything you need to know about why they feel like that. They're yelling in the echo chamber.
I addressed that in some of my videos. And listen, I'm never one to comment on a woman's looks. I think that's between her and her. But I will notice that some of the most hate that I've gotten, in particular, different divestor adjacent accounts, are hiding behind cartoons. And I started to find that odd because women know today, whether or not we want to admit it out loud or not, we know that today, at the end of the day, your looks is your social currency to a certain extent. How you feel about yourself, how you're presented about yourself says a lot. And women who feel good about themselves aren't hiding behind cameras. They're just not. If they're on social media building accounts, they are flaunting or they're at least camming up. So no woman who feels good about how she is or feels good about, is comfortable in who she is in her body is going to hide behind a cartoon. That doesn't
exactly.
So that's why I started to notice that. And I was like, I think this is a cover up. I don't really think that the big issue is that you really even want white men as much. I think there's some other stuff going on here. But in my particular, just from what I've seen, there's a lot of money to be made off of that particular ideology. So maybe that's why I continue in it.
No, that's part of it. But I also want to say, too, it's not necessarily so much even about, although physical beauty is a part of it and that's subjective, a lot of it is about personality as well. Because I want to say this right now. Look, I know girls who are like 300 pounds and they keep dudes because their spirits are nice and they have decent personalities and everything. So you can be, look, I'm based in Atlanta, and Atlanta is a very body conscious, superficial city. Now, having said that, I know girls, like I said, who are big or considered big, and they've been married 10, 12 years or so like that, or they keep having boyfriends and they keep dating. I also know women who look like supermodels who cry in their bed every night and the bed is cold. So, I mean, a lot of that stuff is personality. And a lot of that stuff ties into, I'm saying it's a lot about the energy you give off. You know what I mean? If you give off like a negative, hateful energy, people pick up on it. If you give off a positive energy and you're welcoming, people are going to be appealing, going to find that appealing as well. So that's a part of it too. Yeah, the physical is important, but so is your spirit. And a lot of these people have not done any work on their spirits, or they're dealing with trauma, and the trauma is legitimate, but they don't know how to get access to, help or any kind of resources. And because they're sort of in this echo chamber that nobody pays attention to, they get on there and they say black men are trash and they hate them, or just say you hate black women and nobody hates you. Says your personality sucks. Go get help.
No, literally. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's either they don't know how to or they refuse to. Because I think some women just, they need that echo chamber for whatever reason. But I've said this before too, where it's like, especially in the black culture, black men are the most body positive. I think I know plenty of black men where maybe she's not the most in shape or whatever, but she's a great personality. She's nice to get along with. A lot of them black men out there. I think our culture is known to be more accepting, for better or for worse, of bigger women. And so I don't think it's necessarily size, or that can play a role if you're trying to have like a supermodel or be a billionaire. But if you're a nice woman with a sweet personality, that could get you a long way.
Exactly. And the same is true for men. If men are just mad all the time and for whatever reason, or you're got a negative personality, nobody wants to be around you. A lot of people I guess it's because we live in this culture and everything's surface, but people discount how important personality and your energy is and everything. And you have to be able to hit on all those cylinders, or you're going to be by yourself. And that's nobody's fault but you. And you got to work on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Shout out real quick to, is it Nawoni? I hope I'm sorry if I butchered that. It says, can he link the impact of intersectionality on activism? Do you want to speak on that?
Yeah, I'll speak on it for a minute. Well, just to give a baseline, the idea of intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and the basic premise, and this is going to be a very thin thumbnail sketch, but the basic premise of intersectionality is that there are different intersections of oppression, and there's different intersections of suffering in a society. You can be a Black person, you can be a white person, but if you're a white person without money, then you're at the bottom of the intersection of whiteness. If you're a Black person, but you look a certain way, if your body type looks a certain way, if you're a certain skin tone, if you're cishet, which would mean straight, or that's going to give you a certain level of privilege that someone else who may be gay or transgender may not experience. And that's actually a valid theory. Here's the issue. A lot of people use intersectionality as sort of like a catch-all, and they use it sort of like as a paintbrush to slop it onto everything that they don't like, or there's something, or if there's there's a statement that somebody makes that they don't like, they say they're leaving out intersectionality when that's not necessarily true, because intersectionality is a finite set of theory, but people have turned it and flattened that term to the point where it means nothing at this point. You know what I mean? If you're a straight Black man and you say something about something that you don't like, well, then you're automatically discounted because your privilege is higher than somebody who's transgender. You know what I mean? And I don't necessarily agree with that. I agree with it on a social level, but somebody who works on Pose is doing a lot better than I am and everything. You see what I'm saying? So there's different levels of intersectionality, whether you're transgender or not. I'm not getting a check from FX for being on Pose every week. So I'm just saying, there's different levels of it.
It's interesting because I've always, even when I think of, back when I was in corporate, and I think of the different, rarely did I see Black men in power, in positions of manager. And usually when I did, it was a certain, like I remember one he was a gay man. And then another one, as far as I know, he was, married and had a wife and children, but was very, very non-confrontational, not aggressive at all, had a very, very calming demeanor. Like none of the, at least in the corporate setting, none of the Black men that I saw really high up in those positions were like the aggressors. Now the white, like my different white bosses, whatever, they could be aggressive, they could cuss, no problem. But I remember kind of noticing that when I was deep in corporate and noticing how, I don't know if it was like certain personalities or it just, you saw certain races getting away with certain things and then just other ones not. And I would think about that, like, was straight, okay, like a straight man, a straight Black man in corporate versus a gay Black man in corporate. Can we really say that the straight man, especially if he's more of an aggressive one or a type A, can we really say he's going to have privilege over the gay man who may not be seen? And I hate to put it there, but that's kind of when I started to see those differences and just wondering if it really applied all across the board. I don't know if you have anything to say about that. That's just something that I noticed back when I was really in corporate.
No, I get it.
It's very political and corporate. So
I actually worked in corporate America for about 7 years. I came straight out of school and went straight into working in a field I'm not going to name, but I worked in that corporate environment for a pretty good while. My experience was a little bit different because it's kind of funny. I'm actually going to tell this story in full one day, but I came to that because I was working in the music industry and I was trying to work around that. And the music industry, I don't know if you know, but it's a very different set of rules and a very different social set.
Yes.
There's a lot of things that are allowed in the music industry, for better or for worse, that don't really work in the corporate, but they do work on a certain level. So when I came into when I started working in the corporate field, I actually did okay because I was, and this is something we can talk about with privilege, because I came in sort of like with this, I won't say it was aggressive, but it probably looked aggressive to people on the outside. But I came in with a very direct demeanor. I didn't really bite my tongue a lot. And I fell in with a cohort of men, honestly, who were actually a lot of white men who kind of responded to that. But I noticed that a lot of the, not so much the black women, but a few of the black men who I was around who tend to be a little bit more timid and a little bit more mild were trying to tell me to kind of tone it down, or they had an issue with it. You know what I mean? Because I was one of those people, like, I'd come in the morning like, hey Jim, what's good, man? How you doing, like that? And I think I think they liked it. I don't know if they really liked it, or they understood, or they respected it, or they felt like because I wasn't trying to like code switch or anything like that. I think that got me to a certain point, but I also think that once you hit a certain ceiling, for lack of a better term, people don't know what to do with you. And if you're seen as too aggressive, they see you as a threat, and then it becomes a problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's exactly, and that's what I was saying. And then now enter the colorism argument, which I hear, right, where it's, would that have been different if you were dark skinned? Like, would you have had to out the gate come in be very, very mindful of how you come off? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Really tone it down if you were a darker. You know, I don't know. There's some things that I've seen.
I think about that a lot. Yeah, because I'm a lighter skinned black man, and I'm pretty sure, and I know it's probably opened some doors for me. That maybe somebody who might have been a little bit darker would have had to fight a little bit harder to, and I'm very mindful of that. But I think that's a conversation, and it's a very valid conversation if we're going to talk about colorism. There's a lot of conversation around women and colorism, and that's very true because that does affect, I think, women's self-esteem and that sort of thing. But it can be life-threatening for a certain type of black man, because if you're seen as a black man, I think they've done studies on it. I don't have the data right in front of me, but they said a black men who tend to be darker seem to be seen as more bigger, and they seem to be seen as more hulking and everything. And that can be a very definite threat if you're walking outside in the world and you're being a very nonchalant, for lack of a better term, carefree black man. There's a lot more things you have to be more mindful of when you're dealing with the outside world.
Absolutely. Special shout out to Dr. Tiazon Johnson for stopping by. Much appreciated.
What's up?
Much appreciated. I love his content so much. I always enjoy catching him live and reruns if I need to. It says, great interview. Shout out to both of you. Misandry needs more of a critical focus. Could not agree more. Appreciate you stopping by.
He's another excellent scholar. He's a brilliant man.
Yes. He came on my channel a little while back and was just dropping so much knowledge. It was a very enjoyable conversation. Again, if you guys are here, get those likes up. I know I want to be mindful of time. We have just a few more moments before we got to wrap this thing. So let's see.
This is good. I'm enjoying this conversation. It's really good.
No, this has been, like I said, this has been great. It's been great hearing your perspective on this. I'm trying to see. I had all these questions, but I know we have to be mindful of time.
No, we can keep going. Let's ride. I'm feeling good.
Is there so? And I think you've kind of mentioned this, but if you would like to expound more, you can. I mean, would you say that there is a large money-making industry based upon anti-Black male misandry? Like, there's money to be made off of really pushing and promoting that in different aspects and different arenas of our society.
Absolutely, there is. And we got to go back to the beginning of that. Well, not so much the definite beginning. I've talked about how Black men have always been demonized in the society, but if we're going to talk about in the media spaces, we have to go back to 1915 with Birth of a Nation. I don't know if you've seen the full movie, but the original Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith was based on a book called The Klansman. It was basically a propaganda piece, basically uplifting the Ku Klux Klan and showing them as the saviors of the defeated South. The first part of Birth of a Nation talks about the Civil War, and it shows slaves as being happy and content on the plantation. And then the evil, demonic General Sherman and the Northerners and the Yankees came and burned up the South. And then what that does is it kind of levels the playing field, and it puts Black men on equal footing or superior to the white man. That's the premise of the movie. And there's a scene in the second reel of the movie where it shows Reconstruction. And during that time, that there were a lot of Black men who were enfranchised with the vote, and a lot of Black voters voted in Black senators and black Congress people in the Deep South at the time. Well, the way that's depicted in the movie is that it shows all these basically country coons sitting up, drinking liquor, drinking moonshine, eating fried chicken in the middle of the Senate chambers and everything. Mm-hmm. That was an image that went out around the world. Yeah. And then also another part of the movie shows like a mulatto Union soldier who gets a plot of land, and he accosts this white woman and says, "Now that I'm free, me and you can get married." And the white woman screams and jumps off a cliff rather than be with this man who's obviously a rapist. And the movie is ugly. The movie's like that. Oh my God. And if you think media has the power to influence people now, think about how that felt to people when it was a new medium and people weren't used to seeing movies and things like that. Mm. They showed this movie in the White House for Woodrow Wilson, who was one of the most racist presidents we ever had. And he said it was like history written with lightning. And after that movie came out and went nationwide, I think the membership of the Ku Klux Klan jumped 500% nationwide. Yeah. Oh my God. And I'm saying all that to say that there's always been money in demonizing black men. If you take that down to like, look at local news, every time a black man is found guilty of a crime, or if some black guy does something in the neighborhood, what do you see? The first thing they show is either a mugshot of a black dude with his dreads all out wild, the color, the picture is dark, and he's looking like he's about to come to the screen and kill you or something like that. All these things are by design. Even if you go into the movies like the movie Harriet that came out, they had a character called Bigger Long, who was a black bounty hunter. This dude looked like Suge Knight, talked like Rick Ross, and he pulls up on a bunch of white bounty hunters and said, "I want $500 because I'm gonna screw all the white hood prostitutes I can in Atlanta when I get my money." If you can find me any time in history where a black man walked up to white slave owners in 1834 and said that, "I'll give you $100 right now." But these things go out into the world, and because people don't read and people don't study their history, these images become fact in the minds of people. You know what I mean? And that's what happens. So I'm saying I like to say that, yeah, it's always lucrative to demonize black men.
You know, and it's crazy because I remember I went to Hearst Castle out here in California. I think it's like on Cambria. I live in like the Bay Area, and Hearst Castle. He was a very, very, very wealthy man, and owned I think like at least 90% of media. He owned and ran all of it at his time, and even to this day, it's not much different. It's held by a very small group. And so I remember when I was going and touring his huge mansion, and just looking at different things and recognizing that this one person really, this one family really controlled what people saw and heard for decades. It was so eerie. It was so eerie to me. Mm-hmm. And yet that's what's actually going on. And so to your point, when people are not really critical, they're not critical thinkers. And I think being critical thinker right now is a lost art, is a lost skill. It's something that's not really encouraged today. Unfortunately, they're just wide open for all kinds of propaganda and all kinds of lies. And sadly, there's money to be made, I guess, when you really know how to pull on people's fears or how to, feed off of that. So mm-hmm. Yeah, really, really, really good points. Now, I do want to be mindful. I know you mentioned you had a hard stop in about an hour. So we're getting right up to the hour. This has been a great conversation, but I want to make sure that you are, taken care of. So
no. Things are good. Things are good. I got about like I said, I got to travel in a little bit, but I'm good for right now. We can ride for like another 15 if you want to. I'm good.
Okay. Awesome. Again, guys, if you're here, get those likes up, tag anybody, share this with anybody who think may find it interesting. We're talking about misandry in the media. I'm really excited to be, interviewing Torraine Walker, who is our special guest, who has a lot to say about this topic and has spent a lot of years, trying to fight against this and make a difference. So definitely be sure to check him out again, follow him on Twitter. Check out his business. You can show support in his CASHAPP. Be sure to go and check out his work. He's doing really, really great things, especially as it pertains to just fighting against misandry that's happening today. So again, thank you for being here and having this conversation with us. It's been really interesting. So, just a turn of events quickly, because you touched upon this slightly. What is your take on profiles today? Or movements today that are calling to abort Black male babies? What is your take on that whole thing?
Honestly, I think that's another form of weaponizing a lot of the direct trauma that a lot of Black women are faced with, because I think there is I think there is something to be said for Black women being able to control their lives and be able to control when they want to give birth or when they want to have families, just for economic reasons or even, psychological reasons. I think that conversation does need to be had. But I think the idea and this thing that's happening as far as like aborting Black babies and Black male babies, I think that's really being driven by a lot of white supremacist groups who are probably using Black women as Trojan horses to push this sort of thing. Again, I think that's a separate conversation away from talking about Black women's physical health and Black women's maternal health, because we already know that, the rates of mortality with Black women being able to give birth are skyrocketing, and they're much higher than they are with other women, even Latino women who are even poorer than them, and definitely white women. So I think that conversation needs a separate conversation. The idea of aborting Black babies, I think that's just straight up white supremacist rhetoric that a lot of women who are either linked to white supremacist groups, or they may not even be aware that they're repeating a lot of white supremacist rhetoric. I think that's where that's coming from, because if you look at groups like the Aryan Nations, and if you look at groups like the Order and a lot of hardcore white supremacist neo-Nazi groups, one of their main tenets is creating a homeland for white babies to multiply, to create a white power base and a white power base. And another part of that is exterminating Black children. So I think that's where that comes from. Even if people don't know that, that's where that rhetoric comes from.
So again, and this goes back to a point that I said earlier, and some of those more aggressive, radical divestor adjacent channels. You have Denzel, who has a picture of the Black man being lynched. You have Cynthia who called for abortion. So these channels, you're saying, whether or not they're aware or unaware, are very much working in tandem with, white supremacy and their ultimate goal, essentially, to make sure that these children are not recreated, and so that there are more, I guess, white babies that are being born and that population continues. Very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure there is a lot of self-hate and a lot of divestors. Matter of fact, I'm almost positive that there is. So you have a lot of people, and probably a lot of them come from places where they did not grow up around other Black people, or they might have grown up in predominantly white families, or they might have been adopted, or they might have grown up in all white areas where they didn't have any kind of access to actual Black history, and they just heard what the people around them said, and a lot of them are just parroting that stuff. So I think that's part of it as well. You know what I mean? Some of them I think can be helped. Some of them I think need to go ahead and go where they want to go anyway.
And I think, again, that to your point earlier, if some of these women if they go to college and they're being informed by, white feminists or white, feminism, which, to my understanding, and what are would you say, because this is another question, obviously we know feminism, again, is against the patriarchy, if you will, and there's been this whole blanket statement about, all men being patriarchy, yada, yada, yada. Do you think white feminism, whether it's been, overtly or covertly, has made Black men kind of the brunt of their attack, if you will? If they've focused on Black men primarily more than other groups of men, as far as making sure that they get least opportunities, like how do you think Black feminism and then Black men with Misandry works together? If you can speak more to that link.
Yeah, I think, and this is the take I have on it. Mm-hmm. In my opinion, I think feminism, even if you take color out of it, feminism at its core is white women struggle with white men. They're struggling with each other for supremacy and domination. That's the first part of it. Okay. White feminism is basically which is basically, again, ties into feminism in the first place. White feminism is basically concerned about the well-being and the supremacy of white women. What they'll do is they will recruit women from other cultures and other ethnic groups, as long as they go along with the party line that says all men are misogynistic and all men are patriarchs. When they're talking about is white men. Black men have never really been patriarchs, not even in their own houses, not in America. So so first of all, that's incorrect. Even in the history and the data bears that out. Black men tend to be more involved with co-parenting. Black men tend to be more involved in their children's lives, even when they've been incarcerated, even when they're not in the home. So that's first of all, it's a lie, first of all. But as far as like feminism itself and white feminism, they are more than happy to recruit Black women to be their foot soldiers and be their shields to go and attack Black men and say that because all men are patriarchs, you're a man, you're a black, so therefore you're a patriarch. So of course they're fine with that. But if you notice, anytime any black woman moves against that rhetoric or goes against that agenda, they automatically get cut off. And all that sisterhood goes out the window when they start attacking those same black women.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I remember, during my interview with Dr. Torraine Johnson, he really started to break this down and how he was seeing this play out literally right in front of him, and in college, in the academy. So, and you're right. I mean, as far as the way this struggle, because like anybody who has even a basic understanding of American history, at the very least, at what point did black men have even the institutional power to oppress, to be patriarchs? Like, tell me a time in history where that was the case. Tell me a time in history where they were not the most victimized, the most imprisoned, the most enfranchised. Please tell me a time. Then maybe we can talk about how they've been the misters. Right?
Exactly.
They've all been misters.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's always been misters in the community. There's always been toxic, violent men, black men in the community, but they'll have been the exception and not the rule. You know what I mean? And a lot of time, not to say that it didn't happen. I mean, obviously we know and we've seen the numbers, but that's absolutely a very small number compared to the rest of the black men out here. And I think because negative is so powerful, people run with those negative narratives because the people who are actually doing positive things and going about their lives are quiet. And I think that's part of it as well.
I think what's also oftentimes overlooked, let's just assume that Mr. is a real honest representation of a good portion of black men. Even if we do assume that to be true, it's like, okay, well, who raised those black men? And we can't act like black women also can't be villains. If we look at the domestic violence and the personal violence, it's a whole separate topic. We see that black women are pretty violent, oftentimes more violent than men. No one wants to talk about that. So I'm like, if we're going to have smoke for the men, then we also have to have smoke for the women, especially when they're the ones that are clearly shown to be the more physically violent. Like literally, when you actually look at the numbers, and that's not popular to talk about or to address, but it's an actual honest representation as to what's going on now. So,
well, since you talked about numbers, I'm glad you mentioned it because I have some numbers in front of me right now.
Oh, okay.
This is from the National Institute of National Coalitions Against Domestic Violence, and these are just some really quick numbers right here.
Yeah.
45.1% of black women and 40.1% of black men have experienced intimate partner physical violence, intimate partner sexual violence, and intimate partner stalking in their lifetime. So the numbers are pretty much even just about. Now I'm butchering the numbers. All right, 41.2% of black women and 36.3% of black men have experienced intimate partner physical violence in their lifetimes across the board. That's across every age group. 53.8% of black women and 56.1% of black men have experienced psychological aggression by an intimate partner in their lifetimes. And 17.4% of black women and 14.8% of black men have experienced intimate partner sexual violence other than rape in their lifetimes. So unfortunately, these numbers are pretty much static and even when it comes to when we're talking about physical violence. I think because we don't talk about the numbers and we don't talk about what this data really says about us as a people, we don't want to talk about it. It's easier to fall back into the black boogeyman idea and say that because the man is aggressive, then he's automatically, he's the aggressor in the situation, where a lot of times that violence is bi-direction. And it's horrible and it needs to be stopped, but it also needs to be called out and be spoken about truthfully.
Right. And because I did, I'd have to go back and find, I broke this down a little bit and I'm planning to do a follow-up about, again, about violence and this whole topic of femicide, homicide. But when I looked at, it was looking at a report specifically bi-directionality. I'm trying to think of the actual name, but I know it was a peer-reviewed study. I think they had like 80,000. It had like 80,000 subjects in it, and the reports were similar. But in that one, it was showing that women and bi-directional violence, they were the ones that were initiating more all across the board. This wasn't just for a black woman, it was all across the board. And then I think Dr. Torraine Johnson just released this, I think early this week or last week, where it was showing that black men are actually the most victimized when it comes to interpersonal violence. So again, I think you touch upon the point that we're really hurting each other at the end of the day. If we really want to point a finger at one, then we have to point, someone's pointing a finger back at us, right? That old saying, because we're really hurting each other. And we can really, if we want to get down the numbers and say, oh, well, who's hurting us more, we can do that. But it's like at the end of the day, there's responsibility that needs to be taken on both sides. And we're not, as women, being responsible when we are really initiating violence in many of these instances and continuing to play, men as a boogeyman, as if we can do no wrong, as if we don't have the power to poison food, or hit somebody with a bat, or, put grease, like there's things that there are ways that women also initiate violence that just even, and again, going back to even in the media, right? How many times have we seen women talk about violent acts towards men, or do it in a way that's playful or laughing or celebrated, or as in a way of just like, oh, he deserved it. And it's not a big deal, even like in mainstream media. So what does that have to do? Yeah, that's what it was. Roughly 88,000 in that vetted study on intimate part. Right. I can't remember the number. I have it linked to some of my others, but I'm gonna do a deeper dive into it. But it was a pretty intensive study that looked at violence. And again, it just broke down all these notions. It really just, at the end of the day, broke down these notions that Black men are just a boogeyman, right? Or if they are, that there ain't a boogie woman, I guess.
Yeah, see, and that kind of ties into the topic of the conversation, because if these numbers were happening in any other community, you would see specials on CBS News, you would see them all across the media every day, and you would probably have some sort of you'd be seeing like PSAs about domestic partner violence all over the place with Sarah McLachlan music and everything. When it comes to us, we don't get that, because people automatically assume, well, if a Black man got beat up, he did something, or if something happened to him, he did, he must, you know how it is in the community. Damn, she messed him up, man. He was doing something. That's how we think. And unfortunately, that does a major disservice to Black men who are vulnerable. It does a disservice to Black women, and it definitely does a disservice to Black children, because the families and the couples who are doing this around their children are creating another generation of people who are going to mimic this behavior and repeat it again. So It becomes a never-ending cycle.
Right. And that's why I think it's good that we have conversations like this, because, our phones, YouTube, whatever, this is becoming the new media. So I think especially younger generations are less and less trusting of, the CNNs, the Fox. Not to say they don't tune in, but I think many of us are more turning to this. So it's like, I think at the very least, if not for our generation, if future generations at least have different messages to know, like, hey, this isn't the only vantage point. You can come to your own conclusion, but you at least deserve to know what is happening. You at least deserve to know what the truth is before you're forced some narrative or forced some propaganda that's not taking all things into consideration. Also, shout out to Deanie with the 5 on the super chat. So this Misandry talk is becoming more mainstream. This was a woman who worked in a district attorney office that referred to a male as bullet bag. Oof. There was a woman who worked in a district.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a rough one. That is a rough one. Well,
yeah.
Do you happen? I don't know if you wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, I remember that. That was last year. There was I don't know if this was in Texas. I think it was in Texas. There was a woman. I don't have her name in front of me, because if I did, I'd say it. She worked at she worked as a law, either a legal clerk, or she was in law school working in a court in Houston, or anyway, whatever it was, Texas or Louisiana. And she got into a conversation or some sort of altercation with somebody on Twitter. And the conversation ended up devolving to the point where she said something about that's why you Black men are bullet bags. And it turned out that this woman, again, she was a lawyer who worked in a legal office for a county clerk in a state legislature, not a state legislature, but a state court. Oh, wow. And somebody got a hold of her information, and they started putting it on blast on social media. And she basically deleted all her social media, and nobody knows where she went. I don't know if it got to the law office she worked in, or the clerk that she worked in. I don't even know if she's still working there. But I'm saying that to say that sort of mentality, unfortunately, is not uncommon.
No.
If you go on Twitter, anytime somebody says something hateful about Black men or some sort of anti-Black misandrist statement, if you go back and look at the likes, there's always people who work in academia, who work in the legal profession, who work in punditry, who work in mainstream media, who are using their real names and the connections to their organizations they work for, who are laughing along with this stuff. Now think about that. Let's say, for example, if you are a young Black man who's dealing with mental health issues, and you think because you want to talk to somebody who is Black, who may understand you a little bit better, you try to find a Black therapist. If you find a Black therapist who has this sort of mentality and is laughing along with people who are calling black men bullet bags or calling them hateful slurs, what is that going to do to the mentality of that young black man? What kind of person, what are they going to recommend happens to that young black man if he's in the court system? What is that going to do to the families of the people who they're going to have to come in contact with these people? People don't think about that, but that's very dangerous. It's extremely dangerous.
Yeah, I even think about that. I even think about that with nurses or midwives or different black women, because we know, you mentioned infant mortality and all that kind of different stuff. It's really bad for black women. And I think about that now. You have a lot of these black women who are going into nursing and stuff like that. I mean, God forbid they're kind of on this whole black babies vibe, or they're kind of in that streaming down that line of like, oh, this is a little boogeyman. I think about that. I don't know the numbers. I'm not saying this is all black nurses, not at all, but I'm just saying this kind of ideology goes unchecked, and it's not only unchecked, it is promoted in these different streams of influence. What does that mean for future generations and children? So I think that's why it's important that it's addressed for what it is.
Mm-hmm. And for a long time, I mean, people were able to get away with it. I think this year, honestly, that's one of the positives, if I could say anything is positive in the wake of the horrible murder of George Floyd, is that people are starting to become a lot more aware of what these narratives can do. And people are starting to become a lot more aware of the power of your words and the power of narratives and the power of demonization. You know what I mean? I think that's what happened. It's just like what we saw, we saw what almost happened to Ryan Coogler like last week. You know what I mean? The same sort of situation, regardless of what he was doing in the bank, he could have very well met his death that day. You know what I mean? And that sort of thing, these sort of narratives carry across outside of social media and outside of academia into the wider world. And black men and black women are dealing with these outcomes, but especially black men. And I think we have to have these conversations. And we also, unfortunately, we're going to have to start holding people accountable. We're going to have to start emailing people's jobs with this stuff. We're going to have to start doing the same thing that every other ethnic group does when they've been offended by somebody. If it takes letter writing campaigns, if it takes change petitions, we're going to have to start doing that, because people who think like that either need to get help or they need to get out of the fields there and to stop damaging other people.
Yeah, and get themselves help. Like, go take a break and heal, and then maybe come back.
Mm-hmm. Quit looking for a partner and go find you some help.
That part. Oh, seriously. Well, want to be mindful of time. If you want to, wouldn't mind wrapping it up with answering this last question. What is the best way to combat misandry in the media, in your opinion?
I think the best way to combat misandry in the media is to make sure that people who have alternative viewpoints are heard. That's going to be very difficult to do in mainstream media spaces, but because I work in media and because I see the way things are moving, you'll notice a lot of mainstream media is starting to move away from the idea of a scripted mainstream broadcast news readers that you're seeing. If you look at nightly news, even cable news, they're going more to talking to people remotely or talking to people with cell phones. And I think people who have different narratives have to get control of that and start creating their own stories and start to move that stuff into the mainstream. Because, it's true that the media does create the news, but people have the power to create the news as well. And I think once they're aware of that, then they can start moving some of these narratives around.
So you're saying kind of leveraging, I guess, the media that we have at hand, whether it's their phone, YouTube, our own, personal platforms where a person can really start telling stories and essentially doing grassroots work to try to get that alternate message out there. You made the example of Kevin Samuels, where it's like, love him or hate him, he hasn't come up through mainstream or these other different streams where feminism would really be at play, yet he's been able to be really successful at pretty much giving a counter message. And he's gotten a lot of success, partially because it's probably a breath of fresh air, not only for Black men, but just men in general who feel like, man, I'm just so tired of not being heard when it comes to some of these just basic things.
Even people like Kwame Brown, who just decided I was tired of people talking about me. I'm tired of Stephen Smith clowning me, so I'm gonna get in my car with a phone and hold it up like this, and I'm gonna talk about everybody to the point now where people are apologizing to him for saying what he said because he has no filter. You feel what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But it's there. A whole social justice movement started with this because people were taking video things with their cell phone, and they were able to build a movement out that. Now, we can talk about where that movement went, but that shows you the power that human beings have and the people have. So I think that's what we got to do.
Absolutely. And I know that's a big aspect of what you do. You storytell, you put messages out there that are helpful and that are challenging the status quo, especially when the status quo is, unhealthy propaganda, garbage, lies, however you want to put it.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, this has been great. Do you have any other final words or things that you would like to, leave with the audience before you sign off?
Basically just, we are a beautiful community. We are beautiful people. We have our issues just like every other group has, but Black people, Black men, Black women, Black children of every color, we are beautiful. And if we can do the work to rebuild ourselves, then that's all we really need. We have enough to do it ourselves.
Absolutely.
And let's learn to respect each other and love each other.
Yeah, cannot agree there. And that's where I think sometimes that starts with, a lot of these people who I think are spewing so much hate against other people, against other men and whatever, that means that when they look at the mirror, they don't respect themselves, because you are at that point, you're giving off what you have inside of you. And if the only thing that you have is that hateful, is that poisonous, toxic, then it's like, what is that saying about your own self-worth, your own relationship with who you are? Like, it's not showing anything good. So
mm-hmm. Exactly.
You make some great points. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your perspective, having this conversation. It was really enjoyable. Also appreciate you staying on a little longer than an hour.
Oh, good.
Put some places to be, but this has been great. You guys definitely be sure to check him out. I have all the information in the description box. You can check out his website, follow him on Twitter, Instagram. Are there any other places you want people to go?
Yeah, Context Media Group, contextmediagroup.com. Also, my YouTube channel, which I need to restart again, Torraine Walker and everything. Those are it. And I'm also working on a couple of projects that are kind of in the can right now. I can't really speak on them as yet, but then I'm going to come back and we'll talk about those again.
Okay. Awesome. Well, again, thank you for being here. This has been great. Awesome. And you're welcome back anytime.
I'll definitely come back. I had a really good time speaking with you, sister.
Yeah, this is awesome. All right. Well, you have a good one and safe travels.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good night.
Yes. So real quick, I did see some super chats come through that I want to make sure I acknowledge. Shout out to Major Payne for the 10 on the super chat. I love the conversation. Keep it going. Yeah, that was so enjoyable. Also, I want to give a shout out to, I think I saw another one come through. Yeah, Dean, that was a good comment I saw. Again, shout out to Deanie for showing some extra love and support today. Much appreciated. Also, shout out to CD for the 5 on the super chat. I see there's a lot of Black women who want to be, a lot of Black women. Oops, where'd you go? Okay, a lot of Black women who want to be caring in the Black community at the expense of Black men. They spew a lot of fake victimhood propaganda. That's right. That's absolutely right. And I think you're hitting on some points there. As you mentioned before, there are different reasons for this. Some of it could just be miseducation. You have women who go to colleges and they may be instructed and taught by white feminist leading ideology, which is overwhelmingly present in the academy. Then if you take that and then now you have kind of like a pipeline to the mainstream media and different internships and sometimes different lawyer firms, like all these different places where there's a lot of power given to different feminist leaders, however you want to put it. And unfortunately, that can be to our detriment, because we know that a lot of this has to do with just a power dynamic that at the end of the day ends up creating dissension and ends up, I think, reinforcing very negative stereotypes that strictly are just not true when you look at the numbers and when you look at the data. So no, I think you hit the nail on the head. Not to mention that there's money to be made, y'all. There is money to be made off of misandry. There absolutely is. So also I saw a CASHAPP come through from, wait, where is it? I thought I saw one. Sorry, my phone was on silent. Okay, I saw a CASHAPP come through Hakeem. Shout out to Hakeem again, sponsor of the week. I appreciate you, Hakeem. You're always showing some love and support. Great moderator, just great supporter. I truly, truly, truly appreciate you. And I appreciate all of you guys who are here hanging out with me, share, just hanging out, listening in. I think this is a topic that does not get enough play and does not get enough. It's just not talked about enough. But I'm hopeful with having these kinds of conversations and these discussions and having people out there who are really leading the charge, in an attempt to get the message out there and to start to really push back against the status quo and push back against those things that are really harmful to women, to different generations, to the Black community in general. So I'm grateful to have these kinds of discussions, and I'm grateful to have people who are putting their work, who are dedicating their life to really making sure that we are pushing back against those things that are ultimately going to cause more cancer in the community. And I see a few comments coming in here. Yeah, I see trolling. Side note, I think he made really, really great points about trolling and about these agents of chaos that I think they are paid, they are funded by different interests, different hate groups or whatever, and they are funded specifically to go in and create demise and chaos and dissension within the community. And so I do think it's important that we also recognize that as we are online and know that some of these profiles out there that are doing and saying evil, crazy things, some of them literally are agents. They're trolls. They are not real people, or if they are real people, they are not who they say they are. They are funded interest from, outside forces that are strictly trying to cause divide, feed into the gender war, feed into the division in the Black community. And I think he made it a good point. And for that reason, we need to make sure we don't feed into what they're saying, but we start to actually push back and talk about what actually is going on. And that is, let me see, Robert, we see even many conference. Yeah. And that, and that is at the end of the day that we can't just believe everything that's said online, y'all. We can't just believe everything that's said in the media. I mentioned this before that, for decades, even if you think of Hearst, who was really, really well known, very, very, very wealthy man. His family to this day owns a lot of media platforms. And that one man was responsible for 90% of media, 90% of outlets he was responsible for in his day. And his descendants live today, and they also have a lot of, they still own a lot of different channels. They still own a lot of different media sources. And so why is that important? I think it's important that we do our own research. It's important that we do our own understanding and not necessarily just believe what is being fed to us. Just because I say something, just because your favorite person that you like or you follow who has, you like their personality or they have nice clothes, they do the makeup well, whatever, just because they say it does not necessarily mean that it's true. And I think sadly today we have a lot of people who are making money off of spewing, whether it's propaganda or selling good stories or selling new theories or new ideas that sound sensational, but they're just not true. And they're out there to make money, and they're out there to exploit, and they're not out there to help people. They're not out there to actually try to be positive or to try to help future generations. So we have got to be mindful that not all media is necessarily out there to help you. And I think it's important that we start to do our own research, or at the very least take things with a grain of salt without just believing it as it is, especially when what you're listening to or what you are believing is causing you to hate against anyone. What you are listening to is giving you a reason to hate against anyone, whether it's women or men, Black men or women or whatever. If it's giving you a reason to now go and stereotype and demonize an entire people group, I question whatever that thing is. I think it's more beneficial to take these different topics. We talked about a lot of different things here, right? Obviously, misandry in the media. We looked at, how it's impacting education, how it's impacting entertainment, domestic violence, all those different things. You want to take it for what it is. Look at actually what's going on. Look at the race, all those different things, versus just listening to what sounds good before you come to conclusions. Because like I said, if we just go and believe fairy tales or just believe stories that are popular, and because I saw it on TV, it must be true. That's not always the case, especially when we know that there are interests out there who are being funded from people who don't necessarily have good intentions. That does exist, y'all. So anyways, He said he's 4 times on in the US. That's not surprising. That is not surprising. Last I checked, it was like, yeah, I think like 6 or 7 major companies, whatever. And if that's only owned by 4 families, that reinforces what I said before. Imagine if it's a handful of people who are really controlling or managing what we see or what we hear, what we learn. Like, you got to know that's not going to be. It's not going to be perfect. So I say you and your guest are well researched and knowledgeable. We need more like you, blessed. I appreciate you, truly I do. Listen, I don't pretend to be an expert on everything. I'm certainly not. So that's why I like to bring people on who I think know more than me, or who can enlighten us, or at the very least who can provide another perspective that I think will be helpful for you to consider. So again, I appreciate the support. I appreciate all of you guys here. This doesn't get enough play. We all like to pretend that we live in a society that is exclusively or specifically misogynist. Not to say that misogyny doesn't exist. It certainly does. But I think it's about time that we talk about the way that things in general are not necessarily equal. And sometimes that means also men. Sometimes that means that men are not are put in positions that are actually harmful, not only to them, but ultimately harmful to families and communities. Because whether or not we want to acknowledge it, when men in the community are held down, that's going to impact everybody, women included. That's going to impact everybody, women included, children included. So it's important that we recognize that. Yeah, you said these broadcasts are designed. I agree. These broadcasts are designed for who they're designed for. Most are asleep, so they can't relate, and that is true. That is true. That there's just certain people out there, and there's certain people out there who are just not deep thinkers. I understand that. It is what it is. But I think at the end of the day, if you're not a deep thinker, you don't think at all, you don't do your own research, then I don't think you should be leading the conversation. I will say this too. I believe, everybody can have their opinion, whatever. But if you don't know what you're talking about, if you're not real researched, if you don't have the authority in whatever that topic is, whatever, you don't need to be leading the charge. Okay. If you have mental issues, if you have hateful issues, whatever, then it's like, you probably don't need to be leading the charge in that conversation. That's just my take on it. So anyways, y'all, this has been fun. I have some more interviews coming up, of course, as always, this week. So definitely stay tuned. We're going to be talking about church hurt on Thursday. So that should be interesting. A bit of a change in topic, but I think that'll be an interesting one. So definitely stay tuned for that. Also stay tuned for other interviews and upcoming videos that I have. If you haven't subscribed already, please feel free to do so. And then also support your favorite content creators. I will do my best, and many of us do our best to bring you content that is educational or inspiring, informative, entertaining, whatever. But this is a group effort. So definitely show support to your favorite content creators, whether it's through hitting the like button, becoming a channel member, showing love on the CASHAPP, on Venmo, or the super chats. This is a group effort. And again, if you especially like what's going on here, and if you want to be a part of trying to do something positive and constructive, definitely show your support. And also for all of you members out there who have been really consistent and who have just been riding with me for some time, I haven't forgot about you. Like I said, I'm going to do my best to try to acknowledge those of you who have gone above and beyond to sow into this community. And so I really appreciate you. Again, shout out to sponsor of the week, Hakeem. And I said, there's plenty of more of you guys I'm going to be highlighting over the next few weeks for being super supportive. So you guys have all been great. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for stopping by. Thanks for being here, and definitely stay tuned for some other upcoming content. And y'all enjoy the rest of your day. We'll talk later. Bye.